Good afternoon. We'll reconvene the hearing. This afternoon we're hearing from Paul Johnstone and Robin Miller with regard to evidence they wish to present for 146 Broughton Street for the registered building there, the former Gore Dairy Factory. And we have online Tina Carson-McColl and also Anne McEwen, who have been advisors to the council. So Paul and Robin, welcome. So we'll hear from you initially. We'll then have some questions from the panel. Then we'll hear from the council advisors in terms of what they've presented, and then no doubt some more questions of them and also of yourselves. So we had an initial statement from Robin which gave rise to some issues that there was comment on from, I think, council's legal person, and a later version came in on Friday about 4:30. I think it arrived in my in tray, which my understanding is it is identical, except that you have removed a couple of paragraphs out of it. Yes. And acknowledged that. So it would help for the record when you come to speak, we just highlight those points. So Paul, over to you in terms of the way that you want to present what you have to say to us. Please use the button on the speaker when you're speaking and move it a bit closer to you so that those who are online are able to hear. But welcome, and with you.
Thank you. Well, thank you for the opportunity to be able to come and speak to the panel today. We do appreciate that. And yes, we'll be interested to hear your comments in due course. I've given a this two-page summary out, which hopefully the panel have received. It's just by way of a summary of the key points that I'd like to make. And I'd just like to start by way of background. My name is Paul Johnston. I have a wife, Jocelyn. We do have a long association with Gore. Sure.
So is that what we should have?
There's a written two-pager in front of it.
In front, yeah.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep, so the writing's in front and then the page at the picture's behind. Yes, we shifted as a family here to Gore some 28 years ago, although we've always been Southlanders. And we were heavily involved, have been heavily involved in the community in a variety of areas, both through our work, employment, and through various community groups. We have a desire to see Gore continue to prosper and do well, and that includes ensuring that its heritage and its heritage buildings are preserved. We have a real heart for that. We do actually own a number of other buildings in Gore. We pay plenty of rates, and most of those are residential by nature, and a number of them have been historic villas and cottages, and I think I've done up in the last 10 years 5 that I can recall, buildings that have been brought up that perhaps didn't really have much in the way of a future, and we've worked hard to ensure they could be renovated, repaired, restored, and given new life. We really do value heritage where it genuinely exists, but where it doesn't, we don't see any need to have to just pour money at something. The ownership of this building came about approximately 18 years ago through an association I had with the folk who were then running a small butchery, Southern Salami, on site. The building owner wanted out, and the tenants wanted to have somebody who still owned the building. So I purchased that. Initially there were 3 tenants. There was a bakery / catering business. Many here will recall Colony Catering. The top part of the building was used for many dances and weddings and 21sts and all sorts of things. Also, there was a butchery shop that had been going since, I think, about the 1950s downstairs. And there was also, at the same time that many of the renovations were undertaken, mid-century last year, a residential flat was purchased. And so I was the landlord, or we were the landlord, my wife and myself and our trust. And the building was predominantly in very similar condition to how it is now, actually. It was never a particularly pretty building from our recollections. Now, however, there is only one tenant, and that's the residential flat. upstairs. There are no other commercial tenancies, and so we've used the vacant space just for storing surplus building materials. In terms of the process, how we come to be here today, I was first contacted by Gore District Council, I think back about mid to August 2022, advising that this building had been indicated as wanting to go on a schedule of possible historic sites, especially in the upcoming 10-year plan review. I did actually have quite a discussion with Dr. McEwen at that time, and I submitted what I believed were my arguments as to why I didn't feel as though the building should have been at that degree of listing. However, it did progress to the point where it was noted in the council's 10-year plan as being a building of significance, and so then I submitted more formally a written submission, but it was pretty much in my own more, I guess you'd call it common sense or basic non-expert opinion, which I thought would be resoundingly sound enough to win any argument, but it didn't prove to be the case. And so as the time drew near to this hearing and the closing of all the presentations for the review, I realised that I needed to obtain a more detailed and indeed expert opinion on the building, and so that's why I engaged Robin Miller pretty much at the 11th hour of Origin Heritage to give his opinion on both the building and of the council's, and basically give a review of the council's report. So that's by way of background, and that's how Robin comes to be here today, and he's happy to work through his report and to answer any questions that anyone might have, obviously. I thought I might, if it suits, I'll just quickly whip through these 10 points that I have, much of which is all interrelated and interlinked. We don't dispute the age of the dairy factory that was built around 1986. That seemed to be when the tenders went out. There are older examples within New Zealand, and some of those, I believe, still more closely resemble their dairy factory history. Much of that, in my opinion, has been merged and lost in this building. Secondly, the comparison of the original building with the present site, and to me that's one of the absolutely critical aspects of what we propose, what I'm proposing today, and that is where, if you look at those two photographs that I've handed out in hard copy, you'll see how the original building that was built in the 1880s, and I'll get Robin to give this a whole lot more detail, it really was a very pleasant looking building, and if that was still there today, I would go to extreme lengths to try and retain, preserve, look after. However, it's been through so many modifications and, in fact, virtual rebuilds in the mid-60s, that what you have before you is the building looking from the south in the front page there, which is simply not at all like what was originally built. It may occupy a very similar footprint, and the area to the right, or the lower part of the page there, still has a pyramid-shaped roof, in other words, four-sided roof, joining up in the middle. But frankly, that's about, and in my opinion, some of the very few redeeming features to the building. In many, many other respects, it does not represent at all what you see in the second photograph, which was brick. It was a masonry building with tall arch and flat-headed semicircular windows. It had a beautiful slate roof with ridged vents, whereas now it's a predominantly concrete block or brick plastered over walled building with a corrugated iron roof and only one very small vent that was erected in the 1960s. Also on Robin's report, if you were to look at the report fully, this is the one from Origin Heritage. On pages 12 and 13, he's put in a tabular form there the original design features and materials of the building, the current day and existing design features, and any comments. And that's on those two pages, 12 and 13. And I think that that does make really good reading in terms of the comparison of what was there and what is there now. And I think that that really cuts to the heart of what it is that we're looking at. Due to a fire in 1963, much of the building, while it still occupies a similar footprint, was rebuilt. There are copies of plans in Mr. Miller's report that were submitted to council showing the various additional work and the rebuild that took place, in particular above the largest area there. And so that included the building of basically an events area or dance hall area with some toilets, and also the building of that two-bedroom flat. That was all mid-1960s. So then what began life on the site, I'm at point number 4 now, it was this brick face masonry building. Now it's completely different, as the photos show. If you want to have a more detailed examination of the building, then we would also like to invite the panel or any of your representatives to come and view the building and see for yourself the significant differences that there are between what was originally a very pleasant building and the massive changes that it's undergone since then. Also on page 14 of Robin's report, you'll see that he does dispute a number of the arguments concerning other items of significance that the building was deemed to contain. And the reason why we argue against those points is because of what's there now. There is just so little of what was originally there. It's been left to be in poor repair, sadly, over a number of years, but even if it was to be restored, it would only go back to mid-1960s build, because that's what was built. So the practical implications over the page on point 6 is that any owner, whether it's ourselves or someone else, if we're going to somehow comply with Heritage New Zealand, Historic Places Trust, etc., what are we being asked to take the building back to? Because the bulk of what was there in the 1880s is simply not there. And so we could really only take it back to a better version of a mid-century construction. And in our opinion, that's completely unworkable from a commercial or financial perspective, and we don't see that it achieves anything from a historic perspective or really adds anything to the heritage values of the town. Number 7, linked with this, or compounded by this, is the fact that if we were to do up this building, there would be no demand for it. There is no demand for commercial buildings in West Gore. There's about 4 buildings on Broughton Street. There's a fish and chip shop, which is opened some nights of the week. There is a dairy, which I think is helped to be profitable due to the vape shop that's right next to it. There does appear to be quite a successful beauty therapy business there. That's good. But I know that Tony Parrish redid his butcher shop about 4 years ago, spent a lot of money on that building, and I don't know that it's even really been open since then. Just no demand. He was planning on having it as a restaurant and all sorts of things. It gets used for doing a little bit of meat processing, and he does wholesale some product out of there, but it gets used very, very little. So it would be, financial foolishness in the least to spend a lot of money on a commercial development in Broughton Street. And furthermore, I believe it would only further split and weaken the commercial heart of Gore as it presently stands. There's a significant number of sections, and I know because I own some of them, on Hokanui Drive, which have been sitting empty, vacant for many, many years. We cannot find people who want to come in and develop and build something on there. I'd crawl over broken glass to find somebody who could do that. So there is no demand for building new commercial entities on our main thoroughfare. And then, of course, there's also still vacant retail spaces, and we all know that retail is undergoing severe challenges, and that's in the main heart of Gore. I think it would be folly to try and develop further commercial buildings in West Gore. Frankly, I think also that the present buildings is not pleasant to look at. It's an eyesore, really, and it is somewhat ripe for redevelopment. That's not why I bought it. It was because we were the landlords of other tenants, and and because of storage. But frankly, eventually it's going to have to be redeveloped. For the good of the town, it needs to be redeveloped. And I can't see how any building owner would want to spend, the sorts of dollars that would be involved to have to restore that building back to some kind of original, even if it was only mid-century of last year, for which there's no commercial development. Like, you could spend literally millions of dollars on that building, but it would just go into a big sinkhole. The present CV of the buildings is of interest, $1,000. But however, for that site, it's about a 6,000 metre site, the whole site, there is, I think, demand for residential development, and I think that will probably be its future use. Point number 9, given the completely amended nature of the buildings and of the financial impracticability of renovating for commercial purposes, I think there is one possible remaining element of significance in the location. That is the corner of Broughton and Thomas Street, and that's really, we're talking about the significance of the location. But if we're saying that that's the area of significance that should be highlighted, or that's the reason why it should be listed, then to be consistent, you'd have to also list any other building in Gore that's been erected on the site of a former significant commercial building. Are we going to list all those sites as well because of their past use? Because if we're really talking about listing buildings on their merits, that's one thing, but that's not what the case is in this building, in my opinion. So then, pretty much in summary, what if the building remains on the proposed heritage list? Well, unfortunately and sadly, I think then its only future will be for a little bit of accommodation, as long as that 2-bedroom flat is up to standard. But there will come a time when that and its storage use won't be applicable. There'll be engineering requirements. It's already had an engineering notice put on the window saying that it's up for review under the earthquake restrictions, etc., as I know council's bound to do. Engineering and related regulatory requirements will force it just to become derelict. We won't be able to amend it, change it, or knock it down because it's going to be heritage listed. And to try and develop it would just be folly, commercially foolish. So in summary, I believe that the building no longer exhibits evidence of sufficient heritage significance to merit its heritage scheduling in the proposed plan. I'd now invite Robin, if he would like to perhaps touch on any matters in his report, and then we can listen to any questions.
Good afternoon. I thought I might just start by answering your question. So originally my report was done for Mr. Johnson, and hence it was one of our standard reports. I had a disclaimer in it, and so I was asked at the end of last week to take that out, which I've done, and I've also added in at the beginning there a section on Code of Conduct, which I've said, whilst this is not an Environment Court hearing, I confirm that I have read and agreed to comply with the Environment Court Practice Note 2023 for expert witnesses. I confirm that this review is within my area of expertise, and I've not omitted to consider material facts known to me that might alter or detract from the opinions I express in this review, or statement of evidence. So hopefully that clears that one up. When I was contacted by Mr. Johnson, it was only a couple of weeks ago, and I listened to what he said, and I also looked at the documents on the district plan review, and one of the things that struck me straight away was in the section 32 report, where there's a statement there by council saying, given the costs associated with identified historic heritage, it is imperative to ensure that only items of significance are listed in the plan. And I think that's really, really important to this particular property. I went out with an open mind about this building, and perhaps I should have said at the start, my qualifications are included in my report on page 2. I'm a Director of Origin Heritage. I've been looking at buildings. I'm a chartered, UK chartered buildings there and a New Zealand registered buildings there. I started work nearly 40 years ago now, and in that time, that's what I've been doing, looking at buildings. I have a postgraduate diploma in heritage conservation, and my day-to-day work for the last 20 years has just been heritage. So my business is looking at buildings, looking at them in detail. So I met with Mr. Johnson and we had a look around, and what I put in my report is my opinion of the building based on a detailed inspection. Now, I don't know how much of an opportunity council has had to have a look, whether their inspections purely been from the roadside or something like that. But as Mr. Johnson says, we would love you to come round and look at the building, and I will explain to you how it has changed. You have my report, and I don't know how much you want me to go through it. I think essentially if I just walk you through what I've said, in part A, this is me looking at the situation. I looked at a brief summary of dairy factories in New Zealand. This building was open for operation in, I think it's December 1886, I found out since. Dairy factories, the main year of their opening was 1882, although one of the earliest ones was 1871, I think. So it was 4 years worth of dairy factories in New Zealand by this time of this one opening. I looked at a brief site history, and I've gone through papers past, and I agree entirely with the Council's Heritage Assessment as to the date when it was built and the fact that it was originally designed by Burwell. Oh, sorry. The rain coming in. How's that? Yep. Yep. Yep.
So, sorry. Say that again. Anne and Tina, are you able to hear okay? No. So if you can move it even closer and speak up. Thank you.
How's that? Is that okay? Yep. Great. So, as I say, I've confirmed the date of construction, and I've confirmed the architect, and then I started looking at photographs of the building, and I think they're really worth a look at. On page 6 there, I've got a photograph which Mr. Johnson's already shown you. I don't know the date of that, but it clearly shows the two buildings on the site there, the smaller one with the pyramidal roof at the front, and then the bigger two-storey masonry building, hipped roof ventilators. But the really key one, I think, is if you turn over the page to page 7, and you do see what a handsome building it was. And again, I don't think that image is dated. But you can see the building at the front there, pyramidal roof, the slate roof cladding that it had on at that time, the really expressed lead or galvanised iron sheet, I don't know which, hips on it, the brickwork, the arch-headed windows, and then if you start looking behind that, the chimney, and then the much larger building at the rear with, again, hipped roof, slate cladding, exposed brickwork, water tank. So it was indeed a handsome building when it was first constructed. So I've set those out on the top of page 8, and then I've got a bit of a summary, because this building does feature in a local document which I got from the museum here. Let me just find the correct title for that one. It's entitled Gore Dairy Factory, a Very Multi-Purpose Building, from Information and Research Material by Mr. Robert Barnett of Gore in 2001. So I then summarised the history. which was essentially 1886 to around about 1946. It was a dairy factory. 1946 has quite a big change. It was really from that point on it became meat processing, although again it had a lot of different uses there, and those are all described in that local history document: butchery, milk delivery, and car tyre or vehicle tyre sales. From that point on, it's changed again significantly through bacon curing, butchery, pie making, bakery, residential flat, and then dance hall and dining room, with a residence and a garage at the back of it. Photographs there at the bottom, figure 3, you can see there that was 1948. You can still see what I described as the hipped roof form of the original building there, that larger part of the site. Turn over the page and you've got another aerial, March 1966, and you can see it's changed very significantly by that point. That part of the building at the back has been rebuilt. It's got a completely different roof form. There are quite a number of different buildings at the front of the site onto Broughton Street, and really you've just got, I don't know if you can see it, but you've just got this very little square with the sort of pyramidal roof that still stands out. In 1963, there was a major fire. And that was the cause of many of those alterations to the existing old buildings on the site then. Over the page, the building had already started to change by that time in the front part with the pyramidal roof. 1960 alterations were carried out there in that blueprint there. It became a new bake room with a different ventilator in the roof, and I think after the fire all the slate roofs had gone and the corrugated iron was on. When I looked into the 1963 drawings, the recovery and reinstatement of the building after the fire, there's a considerable amount of information that you can get out of those. So in terms of the rear part of the building at the back, it had completely lost its roof. Now has, and I've seen the roof, it's still there. It's a steel truss roof frame. It's a different style of roof. It's gabled. It's got corrugated iron on it, modern rainwater fittings. The majority of the walls are rebuilt in concrete blockwork with then buttresses and columns for strengthening or seismic strengthening at that time. New windows and doors. There's a note on there that the walls were all, I presume any remaining brick walls were all sandblasted and plastered at that time. Bathroom was refitted, residential flat added, and it was all new services within it. And on the next page you can see there's one of the drawings with new roof structure at the top, up there. So then, second half of that page, what I've tried to do there is go through and, from what I can see in the original photographs, see what was there, what was part of the original architect's design. Got that in the first column, and then what's there today, and then comments, and essentially you see how much the building has changed. It's simply not the building that was once there. Go over part B. There I've looked at the Council's Heritage Assessment. As I say, I don't dispute at all the date of construction or the architect. But what I do think is that the Council's Heritage Assessment hasn't had the benefit of a really close look at this building. I've had probably the luxury of maybe 2 or 3 days to go through all the changes that have occurred to it. I've had the opportunity to have a look around the inside. So I do disagree with the assessment, and I think that the issues, perhaps the assessment looks at historically what was there, but it's not actually addressing what's there on the site at the moment. And therefore, I just concluded that section, in my opinion, the building no longer exhibits evidence of sufficient heritage significance to merit its heritage scheduling the proposed district plan. Final bit there, just really summarising what I've said to you. If I read the second paragraph, Burwell's original dairy factory is no longer present on the site in any substantial form. A small part of it remains in the form of the square masonry structure with a pyramidal roof at the east end of the building, and parts of the lower floor walls at the western end of the building may also incorporate the original brick walling. May, because they're now cement rendered externally and or completely replastered inside. These are now unrecognisable and concealed within the 20th century cement render and plaster. The part at the east end is no longer identifiable for Burwell's design other than the hipped roof form, having been heavily modified since at least the early 1960s. I do not consider these remaining parts to any longer have any particular or sufficient heritage significance, and there is, to my mind, no heritage value in the 20th century rebuilding, additions and alterations that have occurred. I'll just conclude. I go back to what I said at the beginning, looking at the Section 32 report. The Council's recognition that given the costs associated with identified historic heritage, it is imperative to ensure that only items of significance are listed in the plan, and I don't believe that this building, these collection of buildings that exist on the site meet that threshold.
I'll throw it open to the panel in a moment, but if I go to page 19 of your statement, so there's the long tin building plus the side-on view of the concrete. Where is the flat?
Sorry.
It's at the western end upstairs.
Okay, can you?
Yes, if we're looking at that photograph there. So this is the flat here, and this section down here is the garage for it. And as you can see, this whole section, this is the gabled form of roof. This is all 1960s concrete blockwork rebuilding now.
So both of the pictures there are add-ons?
They are, it's really difficult to say from those aerials whether they slightly changed the footprint, made it slightly bigger or smaller or something like that. Essentially, it looks like the building that's there now pretty much occupies a footprint of the former building. It's possible, when I was talking about the render concealing some of the brickwork, you see that in the gable photograph below, where you can see on here there's concrete blockwork, and that goes all the way up to the first floor and across the top, and then there's corrugated iron on the framing up there. There's this patch of render which doesn't go quite fully across the gable. We could just see a little bit of red brick poking out of there behind that render. So I'm not sure whether that means that that was the end of the building at one point and it's been made a bit larger. Inside, it's all replastered and there's nothing to really help you there either.
The key part, and on page 20, we see the pyramid-shaped roof.
Yeah.
So is that the key part of the original building?
That's what I see as the surviving part, this bit here. Yeah. So you've got that roof form, that ventilator's not original, that's from, it's quite large. I don't know, but it might have been to do with the bacon curing or something like that that was there in the 70s. And then obviously these other buildings of corrugated iron, they've all been added on at a later date, I think, again 60s or 70s, something like that.
And what is that part of the building used for?
Now,
Yeah.
you can't really, because it's single story on the other side, you come in and it's a kitchen, but it's I don't know,
It's just storage now.
70s
Yeah.
kitchen fit out full of storage. There's a ceiling, again, I'm guessing a 70s or 80s ceiling, so you don't really see much of anything above that.
So is that photo 11 on page 23?
Correct, photo 11, that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So all you can see there on the right-hand side of that photograph is the remaining head of one arch window. It looks like the rest of it's been closed up underneath. And I've got a picture there of it's sort of almost behind where I'm standing. There's that little bit of brickwork left, that painted brickwork.
All right.
And then, you know, downstairs from that, on the lower side of the building, photograph 14, that's all you really see. That's modern concrete, painted concrete block addition from 1960s or 70s, I guess.
So where the salami shop is, and most of us remember it was damn good salami as well. When was that built?
I think that was either 1950s or 60s. Again, I just have to check the dates. But I think there was a report at one stage about somebody opening up a butcher shop. It was around the wartime, I thought, but yeah, it's that era anyway.
Okay.
And if you look at it, both inside and out, you'll see that it's mid-century somewhere.
Yeah. If you look at figure 4 on page 9, that aerial, you can see that it was there in 1966.
Right, you got any questions?
No,
Close to the
I
speaker.
don't. I guess I'd just ask for a comment. Quite often we hear heritage buildings are capable of adaptive reuse. I get the impression from you that you don't see that as an option. It appears to me that there already has been adaptive reuse, but 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah, well, 50 to 60 actually. Yeah, it was immediately after the fire. There was a huge amount of renovation, adaptive reuse. Yeah, but not too much of what was originally there remains.
Yeah, but I would say that is, if you class that as adaptive reuse, it is within largely a 1960s rebuilding.
Mr. Johnson, how long have you owned this building?
For 18 years.
18 years.
Yes.
When you bought it, it was modified to this degree?
All of that work had been undertaken. And I think the bulk of it was 1960s. Yes.
And it's just now it's been made a heritage building?
It's just now that it's been considered for listing for heritage purposes under the plan, under the 10-year plan.
Can you explain what impediment it is to you to have that building as it is there? Like, you must have some idea of what you would like to do with that land, not for commercial use, maybe
Well,
for other
look,
use.
I'd happily retain the building for some time because it's helpful storage. It's a big building, and it does produce a little bit of revenue from a accommodation perspective, and it provides accommodation for. I think at the moment there are some Indian nurses staying there, and so it's helpful. It's not a pushover stage in many respects, but I just know that with engineering requirements and the fact that earthquake strengthening and all of those issues coming up, the likely cost. And I've only had an informal look at it. I've got relatives who are engineers who've had a bit of a look through, but the likely cost would simply just be far too significant to endeavour to try and redeem the building. If I really thought that it could be done in a cost-effective manner, then probably what I'd look to do is convert the upstairs area, the former dance floor, into another 2 or 3 flats. But at my preliminary costings on that are just hugely significant, predominantly around earthquake strengthening and engineering. And then converting it from commercial purpose to residential, all the various council requirements that are there are just, I'm not saying they're inappropriate, but they're incredibly expensive to do.
So you would leave it in the condition it's in?
I'll leave it in the condition it's in at the moment for as long as it's able to be left in that condition, yeah. But the problem is that the minute you start to spend money on it, again, it's council requirement, fully understand, Building Act, it's not just one issue, it's a myriad of issues that you have to consider.
Can I just add something to that? Just on the front page, there I've got the note from HH Schedule 2. So the proposal is to protect the entire external envelope. So that then protects all the 1960s concrete block work and all the corrugated iron and the plastic rainwater fittings and modern windows and that sort of thing.
So is there any way that you could just protect that historic part of it, if it is historic?
Well, it's so limited in terms of what do we identify as being historic.
And I'm not sure still what you would gain, because the pyramidal part of it has also been so significantly altered. You don't see Burwell's original design there, you don't see 1882 design on materials or anything like that. So what you would gain by doing that, it's now plastered externally, corrugated iron, and windows have been blocked up. So I don't know what you would gain by doing that.
Everything else that I was interested in, you've answered. It's really helpful to have your evidence, so thank you for bringing it forward. Probably the only thing I wanted to check was I was trying to understand your note around maybe there's like 3 of these arched windows still remaining, and you've got that photo 11 with the top arch of one. I was trying to understand sort of why after the fire you would have potentially lost the arches. It didn't make any sense to me until I look at this photo and I see that maybe they exist but they've been just filled in. So like the brickwork might still be there, but it wasn't retained as a visible feature of the building. Is that?
Yeah, I think that they've just been blocked up and they've had all the windows changed. It's really difficult to tell with all the because it's basically a 1960s kitchen in there at the moment with all their kitchen fittings and structure and things like that. So everything has been changed to adapt to, I think, probably when it was a bakehouse in the 1960s when it was converted. Then they undoubtedly did a lot of different works to it then. But as we've said, we're really welcome you to come round and have a look, and we'll take you around and show you if you want.
So is it likely that because of the purpose that the building's been put to, so in the case that you said in this core pyramidal bit where it was converted to a bakehouse, the needs of the bakehouse meant that the renovations, were done the way they were done? Could we expect that sort of sitting in behind all of these materials, that the brickwork is sitting in behind all of that stuff, just not available or visible? Or
I would imagine that the brickwork is there, but again, you're only talking about the external envelope, and it's all been cement plastered now, and cement plasters stick to brickwork, are very difficult to get off without causing damage. So if if anyone had any ideas about trying to take that off and restore the original face of the brickwork and that sort of thing. I mean, I doubt that it would be very successful, and the work you'd have to go to try and do that, I suspect there'd be a massive amount of replacement and cost. And
So even if those lovely arches are hiding behind all of that stuff, we'll probably never know or never see them. It's not feasible that they can be brought back.
And I still don't know what you would gain, because you would be picking on one small part of a building, which the assessment is about the larger part of the building. That is no longer there, so you'd literally be picking a little bit out of it, and you know, I still don't see what you would gain by listing it and then forcing somebody to not alter that in the future, because listing wouldn't mean that you have to restore it. It would mean you don't alter what's there now. So why would you leave it as it is?
So just to pick up on the answer that you gave and drawing attention to what's shown in the proposed plan, the reference to the entire external envelope, you're saying is not a reference to what is the original part of the building?
No, it's not. It's to the entire external envelope, and the heritage assessment is built around the entire external envelope. It doesn't in any way focus in on this little bit. It hasn't identified it. It's just identified. You know, as I say, it's correctly identified the history of the site and the original architect, but it hasn't addressed the 70, 80 years of change and fire that's happened to this building since it was probably last in use as a dairy in the 1940s.
I've got one last question. If it is to be taken down, i.e. not listed, and then at some future time, you know, cleared for further development, would you have any advice, Mr. Miller, on, you know, what might be salvaged or, you know, at the time that occurs? Is there any value, or is the point that we'd essentially be foregoing any of that, and that would be a matter for just demolition?
I don't think it's a matter for demolition, but it's then a matter for Mr. Johnson. If he were to employ me, then I'd be happy to help him, you know, look at any elements of it that could be retained on the site if they could be given a viable purpose. I couldn't tell you what that is now because we haven't done that level of work or feasibility on it. But you know, if Ms. Johnson was to
yeah, I'd be more than happy with that. If there are historic features there that need to be repurposed, happily do that.
Because we've had other cases where we've had heritage buildings where consent has been given to their removal and had conditions imposed in terms of actually reusing some of the heritage features that were identified at that time, including, I guess, photographs. So it was acknowledging something about the site moving forward. Yeah. And I would have thought even in terms of a residential development, my initial thought was, and I'll be interested in feedback from Dr. McEwen in a moment, was that what I saw as the original part of the building that's remaining. I envisaged it would be possible to do some sort of residential development that actually retained that as a common feature in the middle of the site. But from what you've described, that probably isn't feasible. But it's acknowledging the past of the site moving forward.
Yep.
And as we go on, it's becoming more and more a thing in terms of people, where they live, etc., knowing more about what was there before.
And I'm 100% in favour of that. I really am. Yep.
So is there anything, other questions? So if you guys turn off your speakers for a moment, they'll hear more clearly. So Dr. McEwen, having heard that, you've made a further supplementary report. Thank you very much. Is there, from the discussion we've had, key points that you want to stress, please? And then we'll look at Tina and any comments from her.
Thank you very much. Hopefully everybody can hear me before I start speaking. Great. I was struggling a little bit to hear Mr. Miller initially, so I hope you'll forgive me if I traverse something that that's already been addressed. I guess there's just a couple of things to note. In Schedule 1, in the Historic Heritage chapter of the proposed district plan, that's where you find the assessment criteria for heritage items. And I think that's really fundamental to gaining an understanding of how I came to my assessment that the former dairy factory did merit scheduling based on those criteria. So that would be one thing. I didn't understand, I think it was Mr. Johnson's point number 9, he talked about just scheduling the site if the building wasn't there. And I'll just sort of state for the record, if you like, that I wasn't really sure what that meant, because the intent is to schedule the former dairy factory, and it's simply then to identify the site so that effects like relocation can be addressed through the consent process. Looking at the rules, I think it's really important to look at the rules for heritage items in the proposed district plan, particularly the rule, it's Rule 7, which pertains to partial demolition, which is a restricted discretionary activity, and where it can be demonstrated that there is a risk or that partial demolition will ensure protection of the remaining parts, that the parts to be demolished detract from identified heritage values, and so on. So it's my kind of without prejudice opinion that an application to demolish elements that are later than the 1886 building would comfortably fall within that restricted discretionary partial demolition activity. And that would mean, I think, that the owner could take down some of the parts of the building. And so it is a little bit difficult, I think, to talk about just a blanket protection of the external envelope when that rule clearly signals that the envelope may be treated differently in terms of partial demolition. And Gore district, as with probably every other district and city in the country, has experienced the demolition of heritage buildings. So I don't think it is correct to say that if the building was scheduled, it couldn't be demolished. Yes, the owner would have to go through a consent process, but consents get granted for the demolition of heritage buildings. I think that's the only other point I would make, is that I think it's problematic to talk about buildings in this case. I'm not disputing for a minute that the building has been altered and extended over the years, because you would expect that entirely with a building that was first erected in 1886. So what we are looking at, I think, is a building to which dates can be put to individual elements, and it would be inconsistent for this building just to have part of its fabric scheduled. I know that's something that comes up quite often in a district plan context, is couldn't you just schedule the old part, the special part, the historic part. But what that does is introduce a level of complexity to consenting, I think, that actually makes it more difficult for an owner than saying the envelope of the building is what is subject to the rules in the plan, and then when you apply for a consent, the council has the discretion to say yes, that'll be fine, or how are you going to mitigate the demolition of one part of the building against the other. So I do appreciate that, as Mr. Miller said, he's had the opportunity to spend more time getting to know the building, particularly visiting the interior, but having carefully considered his statement, I'm still of the opinion that the former dairy factory is a significant heritage resource that does merit scheduling on the Gore district plan.
Tina, before we ask questions, is there anything more that you want to add, or are you reliant on the report that we've had from Dr. McEwen?
Thank you. I would just like to add that this building sits within a larger site, and the setting is only really the area around that building, which means that the rest of the site is open for development, so to speak, and we have tried to enable different uses. I know Mr. Johnson doesn't want the building scheduled at all, but we are trying to enable adaptive reuse, and the way we've done that in this case is that we've created a precinct around that heritage setting to enable, it's within the medium residential zone, but we're also enabling light industrial and commercial activities within there, just to give more options. Yes, there is a consenting pathway for different proposals. Obviously, it's only the external envelope that is protected. The provisions allow for internal alterations without a consent, for example. So there is other ways. We have tried to enable the use of the building, and the provisions also recognise that when there is no other option, and the economic cost of exploring those options is a consideration for consenting, that there is a pathway to be able to demolish buildings too. Obviously, it's not a first option we want to see. So yeah, I can't comment on the significance. I have relied on Dr. McEwen's expertise in those areas, but with the provisions we have tried to accommodate and find that balance between protecting heritage and also enabling the use of buildings.
Okay, before I pass over to the panel, I guess for Dr. McEwen, with heritage buildings, there's frequent emphasis given to reuse. I take from your comments that you haven't been inside the building, but nevertheless, what practical reuse do you think could take place inside this building?
Well, I think as Tina's just outlined, when you have a kind of quite large, fairly open building, and then there are a lot of options. From a heritage point of view, a light industrial use would be optimal, because that would continue to uphold those historic values, for which, that was the reason why the building was built in the first place. I think we see a little bit in New Zealand, a lot overseas, creative solutions to using old buildings, and the sky's the limit in terms of imagination. I fully appreciate, though, that there's also considerations around location, demand, and so on. So there's no question that it can be more challenging to reuse a building in a particular location, built from a particular materials, but it's one of those things that, in a way, what's crucial is the will to kind of find that solution, because it would be easy for us all to pitch ideas, but it's a question of whether a current owner or a new owner sees the potential in that building, and all of that follows after the identification of heritage, if it's of significant heritage resources that merit protection under the Act. So that's always the challenge, to kind of see into the future while you're giving effect to the law as it stands today.
I was having a look at the criteria for items, and you referred to Appendix 1 in the heritage section of the plan, and there isn't really consideration of the degree of significance. When you look at the visual appearance of the building, I doubt that it would meet any significant test in terms of its architectural value. So what are the values that make this worthy of protection?
Well, if you'll forgive me, Mr. Chair, I'd have to disagree with you about architectural value, because it's in the context of a late 19th century industrial building. So if we were to compare this to the Dunedin railway station, yes, we're on a hiding to nothing there visually, but the value of this is its design to be fit for that purpose at the time. And it was architecturally designed, which is not always the case with industrial buildings. And I think that speaks to the high value that the shareholders who built early dairy factories in the 1880s, the high value that they placed on creating a notable building that would serve a purpose but also be a landmark, and demonstrate their success, their financial success in getting to that place, and also obviously their hopes for the future. I think the building has very high historic significance because of its early date in part, and it is very early as a survivor. Yes, there were dairy factories built in New Zealand before 1886. I'm currently unaware of any that are still around, partly because the timber ones burnt down very often. The technology and craftsmanship relates to basic, in part it's that use of the masonry, which yes, has been largely obscured by the cement render, but it does appear that it's still, the masonry is still there. Usually people are lazy, so you just cover over what's there, rather than kind of deconstructing it. And I think we also see that the contextual value remains in terms of the contribution it makes to West Gore, and even if you might not know that it's a dairy factory, you know that it's a light industrial building. It stands out in that, and it stands on the divide between the residential and rural kind of boundary of Gore. So I think the building meets the criteria, even though yes, it's not the most beautiful building in the world, but it wasn't intended to be. It's an industrial building for dairy milk processing.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Brown. My question is, if you were to categorise this building with other historic buildings in Gore, would it be of high or low level?
I think it would be of high level, as I say, particularly because of its age, and the importance of dairying in Southland. The Waikato and Taranaki subsequently get a lot of airtime in terms of the history of dairying in New Zealand, but Southland is absolutely fundamental to the development of the dairy industry, of the cooperative system, and that very first cooperative dairy factory in Edendale doesn't exist anymore. So there is a national component to the importance of this building, even though it's been modified fabric now thanks to the fire. Thank you.
I'd just like to add to the background you've just cited. Although the Edendale Dairy Factory has been substantially modified, there's a brick dairy factory, or the remnant, substantial, of one at Bryden and one in the Wyndham area, which clearly looks like a dairy factory. I don't want to offend you, Paul, but it doesn't have a lot of redeeming features as a dairy factory. I'm sorry.
No, you're not offending me at all with that, Cliff. That's the reality.
I was just I thought Cliff's point was quite an important one, that maybe the two experts might want to respond to. How do we understand this example in relation to the ones that Cliff has pointed towards, if either of you are aware of those examples? I think it's obviously, you know, Cliff's got local knowledge that he's drawing from to provide those examples.
And I guess the comment was made that both may be outside of our district, but I'm thinking there's one at Knapdale as well, a brick building.
There's one at Matara.
Yeah.
Matara that looks a whole lot more like a dairy factory than what this does.
Yeah. So that's context.
Yes, and I mentioned the Knapdale and the Matara factories in my additional statement because they've also been scheduled on the proposed district plan, and I think that gives you an idea of the state of buildings, the extent to which they can be modified but still hold significant heritage value, and also the context, because one of the things that's, in my opinion, vital with the schedules in district plans is that they're consistent, and that there's kind of robust evidence that can be pointed to with each and every scheduling. And so Knapdale perhaps holds a higher level of kind of visual integrity, but it wasn't the subject to submission. Matara has been changed. It's enjoying its new life in terms of adaptive reuse. But I must admit, I only picked up on the reference to the Edendale factory. So I'm sorry, but I didn't hear the other one that was mentioned by the
Those other factories would be Bryden, and I'd also say Seaward Downs, and they would probably date, look, I'll say the 40s. They're notable buildings and still substantially as they would have been when they were in use. And they're used for storage at the moment by, you know, people who've got traction engines and various things, but they do look like a dairy factory, whereas this doesn't.
I think you mentioned Wyndham as well, Cliff. Yes, there'd be Wyndham, Seaward Downs, Matara, Tisbury, a little bit further afield. Yeah, there is still a number.
Tina, a question for you. We have a bespoke rule for this site that enables light industrial and commercial activities as permitted. Is it open to the panel as a halfway house in terms of an option to actually have a bespoke rule for the demolition of this building as potentially something like a restricted discretionary activity, so that consideration can be given to what can be done to protect the values, not necessarily the building, but I'm thinking of some of the other consents that have been issued by council that have talked about doing things on site that recognise where it's come to or come from. So my question to you is it open to us rather than removing it from the schedule if we're on that as one option? One is to say, no, it stays the way it is a midway house in terms of saying on this site it's a restricted discretionary having regard to certain matters.
I think there is already the consenting pathway there for, I mean, I'm assuming you're referring to Kakapos Street, which, you know, was considered under the proposed district plan as well. The provisions do allow for consideration of, you know, what is the state of the building? Is it feasible? What are the mitigating factors if someone came in for a consent and, you know, trying to retain some of the features and that kind of thing? Are mitigations potentially for a demolition if it would come to that? But I don't think that this building necessarily would need its own rules, because I think that's already built into the provisions if needed.
Yeah, you didn't quite answer my question. So my question is, rather than, I understand where you're coming from, you'd prefer it not to have its bespoke rules, but is it an option that's available to us?
Oh yes, of course, that could be an option. Yes, as I said, I think it's already allowed for all buildings, not just this one, but yes, that's an option that's open to you to make a bespoke rule. It has a bespoke precinct. The precinct sits in the residential zone though, so it doesn't really have to do with the heritage provisions. More than that, it gives a nod to the historic use.
Right, and I guess corollary, if we're of a mind to accept the submission and take it off the register, should the bespoke precinct provisions that are sitting in the medium residential zone also be taken out as a subsequent change?
Yes, I mean, so the intention with those provisions was to try and enable these other uses. We did have some urban design advice in around the economic feasibility of allowing for those uses on this site, and I appreciate there might not be a high demand at the moment, but there is a development area out in Gore West that might possibly make it more viable in the future. But if the building is no longer there, there's not really a reason to retain a precinct trying to enable an historic use.
Thank you. Any other questions from the panel? So,
Probably one more from Mr Johnstone, just on the basis of what Ms Carlson-McCall just said. If the building wasn't listed and that bespoke zoning disappeared, is that of any concern to you to not have access to that as a consequence of the building not being listed?
The bespoke zoning?
yeah,
Sorry.
so there's a rule sitting in the residential chapter
Yep.
that says on this site it's a permitted activity to have light industrial or commercial activities as an incentive to try and get reuse of the building. But if the building goes, my question to the planner was, should that special status rule then come out so that the only activities enabled on the site would be the activities provided for in the residential zone?
Yeah. I wouldn't have a problem with that. I think that that's probably the most practical and sensible use of the site.
So if there's no further questions, I don't know if there's anything else that's come out of the discussion that we've had that you want to respond to.
I would just say I feel in the room there's been more acceptance of this is a later 20th century substantially now rather than the original building. The building that's described from the 1880s is no longer present. I also feel that it would be quite unjust on Mr Johnston if he had to seek a resource consent to demolish 1960s structure. I can't imagine that anybody else in the town would, that wouldn't apply to other people in the town.
Thank you for that. And if there's nothing else, then thank you for coming in. It's good that we've been able to deal with this matter finally after a couple of stop-goes as we were through the process. Safe journeys back home, and I think it sounds as though it's still a bit wet out there.
Yeah, thank you very much to the panel, everyone here, and for your time and consideration. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And to Dr. McEwen, thank you for being available online and for your feedback, and also to Tina. It's now 2:45, and I want to take a brief adjournment just so that we can reorganise ourselves. So from our advisor's point of view, what is it you were anticipating we would deal with for the hour or so that we have left in the day? Oh yes, Murray came in. We might deal with Murray first then before we adjourn. Thank you for reminding. I don't have eyes in the back of my head.
Yeah, just Murray's points, and then if you have any other questions on the wrap-up for today, notwithstanding the EFO, if there was anything further on that we can discuss, but we can have a break and all that.
Yeah, so let's hear from Murray. There are a few of the smaller things in the Section 42A report we can deal with, possibly McNabb. Got some questions on that, and I guess you're all prepared to cover everything that we come back in on. We'll have a brief talk out there and let you know what we're looking at and give you a couple of moments warning. Okay, so Murray, do you want to come up to the table and just what you have is responding to a second minute that we issued on transportation, and most of what you have provided is just straight response, and I don't think needs any further explanation unless there's anything you particularly want to highlight. It looks like the promised pretty pictures have arrived in a form that shows some funny district council at the bottom. It's not Gore.
Through you, Mr. Chair. The final drawings haven't been received. These are the best we could do to illustrate what the final product is going to be. So that these are hand amended drawings that I sent to a consultant to provide our updated drawings. But these will provide the information that you need basically to see how we've handled the questions and that you have had in the previous minute.
So let me get an understanding just to help through that. If we've got a road intersecting with the state highway, how far back should the entranceway be to any development that takes place on that road?
It will depend on its whether it's urban or rural. So we've taken a different approach than previously, and so urban and rural, I suppose, isn't quite so critical. It's the One Net Road framework is what we're working on, and so it's the classification of the road or both roads. In terms of that classification. Just trying to find the diagram that I've got for that.
So let me use an example that we're familiar with and just trying to understand what we've got here. So we've got State Highway 1 and McKinnon Road. So an excess that was going up to the land that's been looked at as part of the McNabb submission. How far back from the State Highway intersection should the excess be?
So looking at diagram R11, V2,
Yep.
the distance will be that prescribed for dimension M on that diagram.
Yes. Which is there. What's that?
And it is referring to so we'll then refer to table S7.
And that is in the recommended updates to the transport chapter.
Yep, so that's on page 19 of Appendix 1.
And
So
sorry, that's Appendix 1 to which document?
That's Appendix 1 to recommended amendments to transport chapter. So that'll be, I think, will be part of the minute 34, is it, that we're dealing with? Yep. So in table S7, we would be looking at table S7 or part table S7.2 required distances from intersections, and we would be looking at the third, or likely to be looking at the third column. I haven't got the category, the ONF categories for McKinnon Road in front of me, but I'm pretty sure that State Highway 1 will come under the interregional connectors category. So distance M will come under the third column in that table S7.2, and the posted speed there is 100 kilometres per hour on both sections road currently, so that the distance that you're inquiring about on the page 20, near the top of page 20, would be 60 metres.
And if there was a second access put in to that property or the adjoining property, how far apart should they be? And what table do we use for that?
So again, that would be, so that'd be table S7.1, so same table looking at page 18, 19.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm assuming that the additional vehicle access that you're talking about will be on McKinnon Road as well.
Yep.
So that would come under it's likely to come under the the fifth column, the last column, and the distance that would be required there is 50 metres.
Right.
That's assuming the posted speed limit is continues to be 100 kilometres per hour. So it would be a peri-urban or a rural road. So 50 metres would be
Okay,
the
so that's the diagram R11 that helps me understand that one.
Yep.
Now, with the standard construction drawings, I see what's been added is base course materials, etc. I can follow that one now, and there was so on diagram R09V2, the primary commercial access, which would be dairy tankers, etc. I assume this diagram doesn't apply to the state highway connections. So which diagram's relevant for state highways?
State highways, we haven't actually got a diagram specifically for state highway situations.
And from memory, it then needs a consent.
Yes.
So it would be done on a case-by-case basis.
That's correct, yes.
Okay. Cliff and Glenys were also present at that hearing. Have you got any questions, Glenys? Cliff? No. Is there anything else that you need to draw to our attention?
Just a general comment. You've likely to have noted that we've tried to align as much as possible with both Southern District Council and Invercargill City Council, who have got a combined. You'll see that the number of several of the diagrams have both logos on Southern District Council and Invercargill City Council. However, in doing that, we have also made sure that we haven't compromised our own standards, but we've also added the additional element of the One Network framework. Both Invercargill City and Southern District Council really only took into account the movement part of, so that the traffic volume part of the ONF, whereas we have we've brought in the place element of it as well to make it a full adoption of the ONF. That hasn't really compromised our position on these, but it's just clarified it.
So on the first one then, it shows an interregional connector, reference to it, rural connector and peri-urban road. And so on the planners might help out on the information layer of the planning maps, the status of the roads is shown.
Yes, the ONF layer is included as a district plan map layer, not an informational layer.
Oh, okay. Is that likely to change over time?
It may do, but the ONF that we've currently got in place has been in for 3 years, I think it is, and I think probably the element that is most likely to change would be the function, place function, but I think it's quite unlikely in the short to medium term.
Okay, thank you. There's nothing else we need from you. Thank you for coming today. That's appreciated, and thank you, for your help through the process.
Okay.
So we will adjourn. Then it's now 3 o'clock. Very timely, for 15 minutes. Unless it looked as though you're about to say something. No?
I am heading off around 3:30, 3:45. So I just wanted to my legal submissions are super short. There's one bit I'd like to deliver in full, and that's the thank yous at the start. So if you don't mind, so that can be this afternoon, it can be tomorrow. Obviously the heritage one has been superseded, and I mean I'm happy to have it taken as read. I'd just be guided by you when you'd prefer to hear that. As I say, taking into account my timing limitation today.
But you will be here tomorrow?
I will be online tomorrow.
Okay. There's probably going to be a round of thank yous, so we'll leave those to the end. And I think everything else that you had in the statement that wasn't dealt with there is relatively straightforward from our point of view.
Great.
So thanks for simplifying it.
So I can just hand to Jo then this afternoon.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll adjourn for 15 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you.